Get your hands off that truck before I drag you out and book you like every other thief!
Officer, this truck is mine, and every document proving that is sitting in the glove compartment.
Don't insult me with fake papers. Men like you don't own something this clean legally.
Run the plate, check the VIN, and stop pretending suspicion is the same thing as evidence.
Put your hands behind your back, old man, before I make this much worse for you.
Griggs snatched the registration folder from Isaiah's hand and threw the papers across the asphalt. Isaiah didn't chase them. He didn't argue. He just stood beside his father's red pickup as shoppers froze around them. What Griggs didn't know was that the man he was humiliating had the power to put the entire county under investigation. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The sun hammered down on the asphalt like a punishment. Isaiah Bellamy pulled his restored red pickup into the Juniper County Shopping Center parking lot, the chrome bumpers gleaming under the harsh afternoon light. The truck was his father's once, back when the old man hauled church supplies and lumber through these same county roads. Now it carried Isaiah through a different kind of work. He shifted into park near the farm supply store. The engine ticked as it cooled. Isaiah reached for his water bottle, taking a slow sip while watching families load bags of feed and fertilizer into their vehicles. Normal people living normal lives. The piece lasted exactly 43 seconds. A Juniper County patrol cruiser roared into the lot with lights flashing. The cruiser swung wide and blocked Isaiah's truck at an angle, trapping him against a row of parked cars. The light bar painted everything red and blue. Officer Nolan Griggs slammed his car door and stormed across the asphalt. His uniform was crisp despite the heat. His hand rested on his weapon. His face carried the look of a man who had already decided guilt. Isaiah pushed his door open halfway and stepped one foot onto the pavement. He kept his movements slow and visible. "Afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" "Get out of the truck," Griggs barked. "Now!" Shoppers turned to stare. A mother pulled her children closer. An elderly man stopped loading mulch and watched from behind his cart. The farm supply store's automatic doors kept opening and closing as people stepped outside to see what was happening. Isaiah remained calm. "I'm asking what the problem is." "The problem is you're driving a stolen vehicle." Griggs pointed at the red pickup like it was evidence of murder. "This truck was reported stolen less than 10 minutes ago." "That's not possible." Isaiah's voice stayed level. "This truck is mine. It's registered in my name. I have the documents in the glove compartment." "Sure you do." Griggs laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Every truck thief says that." "I'm not a truck thief." "Yeah? Then how does a man like you end up with a truck this clean?" The words hit the air like a slap. Isaiah felt every witness hear them. He noticed badge number 347. He noticed the store's security cameras pointed toward the lot. He noticed the cruiser's number painted on the rear bumper. He noticed the exact position of Griggs' body cam. "A man like me?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Don't play games. You know what I mean." Another cruiser pulled into the lot. Sergeant Clay Rourke stepped out, already moving like Isaiah was guilty. Rourke was older than Griggs, with gray at his temples and cold eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. "What do we have?" Rourke asked. "Stolen vehicle," Griggs said. "Suspect claims it's his." "It is mine," Isaiah said. "Let me show you the registration." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Griggs snapped. "You don't reach for anything unless I tell you to." Isaiah raised his hands slightly. The crowd was growing. People whispered to each other. Someone held up a phone, maybe recording. Rourke walked around the truck, studying it like he was appraising evidence. "Nice vehicle. Too nice for some people." "Some people?" "You heard me." Isaiah watched Rourke's movements. He noticed how the sergeant positioned himself to block one of the security cameras. He noticed how Griggs kept shifting his weight, aggressive and eager. These men had done this before. "The registration is in the glove compartment," Isaiah said again, "along with insurance and maintenance records." "I bet it is," Griggs sneered. "Fake paperwork to go with your fake story." Why would I drive a stolen truck to a public parking lot in broad daylight? Because thieves are stupid. Isaiah felt the stares of every witness. He felt the heat of the sun and the weight of the moment. He had spent his career in courtrooms, but this was different. This was raw power meeting assumed helplessness on hot asphalt. Griggs stepped closer. His hand moved to his cuffs. Get out of the truck. Now. Isaiah complied, moving slowly. He stood beside his father's restored pickup, while strangers watched and judged and recorded. Griggs grabbed Isaiah's arm with unnecessary force, his fingers digging into flesh. His voice dropped to a snarl meant for Isaiah's ears, alone. Old men who steal nice trucks don't get to lecture police. The silence stretched between them like a loaded gun. Isaiah felt Griggs's fingers still gripping his arm, felt the eyes of every shopper burning into his back. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt, making the air shimmer with heat and tension. I need to get my registration, Isaiah said calmly. It's in the glove compartment. Real slow, Griggs warned, finally releasing his grip. And keep both hands where I can see them. Isaiah moved with deliberate care. He reached across the driver's seat, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a leather folder. His movements were precise, controlled, the actions of a man who understood that every gesture was being watched and judged. Here, Isaiah said, extending the papers toward Griggs. Registration, insurance, and maintenance records. Everything's current and legal. Griggs snatched the documents from Isaiah's hand, but instead of reading them, he glanced at the first page with obvious contempt. The paper fluttered in the hot breeze. This could be anything, Griggs said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. It's my registration. Says you. Griggs held the papers higher, making a show of studying them. But how do I know these aren't fake? Before Isaiah could respond, Griggs's hand swept down hard. The papers exploded from his grip, scattering across the parking lot like white birds shot from the sky. The registration landed near a shopping cart. The insurance papers skittered under a parked minivan. The maintenance records scattered between the painted parking lines. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. An older man shook his head in disbelief. Someone's phone kept recording. Oops, Griggs said with a cold smile. Guess they blew away. Isaiah watched his papers tumble across the hot asphalt. He did not move to chase them. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood beside his father's truck and waited. You dropped my documents, Isaiah said quietly. I didn't drop anything. Wind must have caught them. Griggs looked around at the witnesses with mock innocence. Funny how that happens with fake paperwork. Sergeant Rourke stepped closer, nodding like he had seen this performance before. Forged documents don't hold up too well in weather, do they? Those papers aren't forged. That's what they all say. Rourke crossed his arms over his chest. Amazing how every car thief has perfect paperwork these days. Isaiah felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment from the crowd. A mother pulled her children behind a shopping cart. Store employees gathered near the entrance, watching through the glass doors. The farm supply clerk stood frozen with a bag of fertilizer in his hands. Run the plates, Isaiah said steadily. Check the VIN number. Call it in properly. Don't tell me how to do my job, Griggs snapped. I'm suggesting you do your job. My job is keeping trash like you from stealing decent people's property. The words hit like acid. Isaiah heard them echo across the parking lot. He watched Griggs' face, saw the satisfaction there. The pleasure of a man who believed he held all the power. Trash like me? Isaiah repeated softly. You heard what I said. Rourke stepped forward, backing his partner. Look at you. Then look at this truck. Does that seem right to you? Old man in wrinkled clothes driving something this clean? I earned this truck. Sure you did. Griggs laughed harshly. What did you do? Win the lottery? Isaiah stayed perfectly still. He watched Griggs's body language shift, saw the aggression building like storm pressure. The officer was growing angry because Isaiah refused to panic, refused to run, refused to give him the fear he expected. You're making a serious mistake, Isaiah said quietly. The only mistake here is thinking you could drive through my county in a stolen truck and get away with it. Griggs stepped closer, using his height and uniform to intimidate. His chest nearly touched Isaiah's shoulder. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper that somehow carried across the silent parking lot. "Time for you to learn some respect, old man." Isaiah felt the shove coming before it happened. He saw Griggs's muscles tense, saw the decision form in his eyes. The officer's hands slammed into Isaiah's chest, driving him backward against the open truck door. The metal rattled with the impact. Isaiah's back hit the window frame hard enough to send pain shooting through his ribs. He did not fight back. He did not swing. He did not even raise his hands to defend himself. Isaiah simply absorbed the blow and stayed on his feet, his eyes never leaving Griggs's face. The crowd sucked in a collective breath. Someone gasped. A woman said, "Oh my God, you're making a serious mistake," Isaiah repeated, his voice unchanged despite the pain. Griggs's face flushed red with rage. His hand rose high above his shoulder, fingers spread wide, trembling with fury and the need to break the quiet dignity of the man who refused to beg. The slap cracked across Isaiah's face like a gunshot. The parking lot fell silent as death. Isaiah's cheek burned where Griggs's hand had struck. The sound echoed off the storefront windows and car hoods like a crack of thunder. Every shopper, every employee, every witness stood frozen in place, staring at the uniformed officer who had just slapped an unarmed man in broad daylight. But Isaiah did not fall. He did not stumble. He did not even touch his face. He stood perfectly upright beside his father's red pickup truck, his eyes locked on Griggs's flushed face, and waited. "Hands behind your back," Griggs barked. "Now." For what? Resisting arrest. Isaiah had barely moved since stepping out of his truck. He had not raised his voice, had not lifted a finger, had not even bent down to collect his scattered papers. But Griggs needed something to charge him with, and resisting was always easy to claim. "I haven't resisted anything. Don't argue with me." Griggs grabbed Isaiah's wrist and yanked his arm toward his back. "I said hands behind your back." Isaiah's shoulder joint screamed as Griggs twisted his arm at an unnatural angle. Still, Isaiah did not fight. He simply turned his body to reduce the pressure and kept his voice steady. "You're hurting me." "Good. Maybe you'll learn to follow orders." Sergeant Rourke moved to block the gathering crowd, spreading his arms wide to keep witnesses from getting closer. His patrol car radio crackled with routine traffic, but he ignored it. This was taking too long. Too many people were watching. Too many phones were recording. "Move along, folks," Rourke called to the crowd. "Police business." Near the farm supply store entrance, manager Lorraine Massey clutched her keys with white knuckles. She had watched the whole confrontation unfold from behind the glass doors. She had seen Griggs slap the papers from the man's hands, had seen the shove, had heard the crack of the slap that made her flinch. Her security cameras were recording everything. She knew she should step forward, should say something, should demand these officers explain themselves. But she also knew what happened to people who crossed the Juniper County Sheriff's Department. Her nephew had lost his tow truck after filing a complaint about aggressive stops. Her friend's restaurant had faced sudden health inspections after questioning a deputy's behavior. Lorraine's store depended on local customers, local permits, local goodwill. So she watched, and she stayed silent, and she hated herself for it. Griggs forced Isaiah against the truck again, pressing his face toward the red paint. "This truck is being impounded as evidence. You're going to county lockup for theft, resisting, and whatever else I can think of on the way." Isaiah felt the metal door handle dig into his ribs. Griggs's breath was hot against his ear, carrying the smell of coffee and satisfaction. The officer was enjoying this. He was feeding on the power, the control, the way an entire parking lot of people watched him dominate a man who could not fight back. "You made the wrong choice coming through my county, old man." Isaiah's mind stayed sharp despite the pain. He memorized Griggs' badge number, 347. He noted Rourke's patrol car, Unit 23. He counted the security cameras visible from this angle, 4, including one mounted on a light pole that had a clear view of the entire confrontation. He estimated the time since the first patrol car arrived, 8 minutes. He cataloged every witness face, every phone recording, every detail that would matter later. "Before you impound anything," Isaiah said quietly, "I need you to retrieve something from the passenger seat." "I'm not retrieving anything for you." "Sergeant Rourke," Isaiah called, turning his head toward the other officer. "There's a leather folder on the passenger seat. Please get it before anyone touches the truck further." Rourke smirked and walked around to the passenger side. "What, your fake insurance papers? Your stolen receipts?" He yanked the door open and reached across the seat. The leather folder was right where Isaiah had said it would be, brown, worn, with official-looking documents visible through the clear plastic sleeve on top. Rourke lifted it out and flipped it open with the confidence of a man who had seen every scam, every lie, every desperate attempt to avoid arrest. He expected to find forged registration papers or counterfeit insurance cards or maybe a fake business license that some fool thought would impress small-town cops. Instead, his face went completely white. His hands began to shake. The folder nearly slipped from his fingers. "Griggs," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What?" "Griggs." Rourke's voice cracked. He stared at the credentials in his hands like they might burst into flames. "Griggs, you need to see this." But Griggs was still pressing Isaiah against the truck, still drunk on his own authority, still believing he held all the power in this parking lot confrontation. "Whatever it is can wait. I'm booking this thief." "Griggs!" Rourke's shout cut across the parking lot like a whip crack. The fear in his partner's voice finally got through. Griggs looked up, saw Rourke's pale face and trembling hands, and felt the first cold touch of doubt creep up his spine. "Griggs," Rourke whispered again, staring at Isaiah with visible terror. "This man is the State Attorney General." Rourke read the credentials again. His eyes moved across the official seal, the photograph, the signature, the expiration date that was still 2 years away. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. State Attorney General Isaiah Bellamy. The words came out in broken pieces. Rourke looked at Isaiah, then back at the folder, then at Isaiah again. The confident smirk had melted off his face completely. His hands shook so badly the leather folder rustled. "That's impossible." "Read it again," Isaiah said quietly. Rourke did. The credentials were real. The photograph matched. The signature was embossed. Every detail was perfect because every detail was legitimate. Griggs still had his fist twisted in Isaiah's shirt, but his grip was loosening. "What are you talking about? What credentials?" "This man," Rourke whispered, "is the State Attorney General." The words hit Griggs like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally, raw terror. His hand fell away from Isaiah's shirt, as if it had caught fire. Isaiah straightened his collar slowly. His movements were deliberate, calm, almost gentle. He brushed a piece of lint from his green polo shirt and adjusted his stance. The red mark on his cheek from the slap was still visible, but his expression remained perfectly controlled. "Officer Griggs," Isaiah said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority it had held throughout the entire confrontation. "Do you still believe this truck is stolen?" Griggs' mouth worked soundlessly. He looked at Rourke, at the folder, at the growing crowd of witnesses, at the security cameras mounted on the light poles. Everything had changed in the space of 30 seconds, but the evidence of what he had done was written across Isaiah's face and recorded by 4 different camera angles. There was a report." "Yes, there was." Isaiah's tone remained conversational. "We'll be discussing that report very thoroughly." From the farm supply store entrance, Lorraine Massey finally found her courage. She had watched a man get slapped, humiliated, and assaulted in her parking lot while she did nothing. The shame burned in her chest like acid. But now, with the officers looking terrified instead of confident, she stepped forward. "The store cameras got everything," she called out, her voice shaky but determined. "Every second of it. The slap, the shove, all of it." Griggs spun toward her, desperation making him aggressive again. "Get back inside. This is police business." "Ma'am," Isaiah said calmly, not raising his voice but somehow making it carry across the entire parking lot, "please don't move." Lorraine stopped where she was. Griggs looked back and forth between them, realizing he had no authority left. The state attorney general had just countermanded his order in front of witnesses, and there was nothing he could do about it. The sound of another patrol car pulling into the parking lot made everyone turn. This vehicle was different, newer, cleaner, with extra antennas and emergency lights. A man in a pressed uniform climbed out, moving with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to fixing problems before they became scandals. Sheriff Hollis Vardell was 58 years old, silver-haired, and had perfected the art of looking concerned without actually feeling concern. He strode across the parking lot with his hands raised in a gesture of calm authority, his face arranged in an expression of professional regret. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," Vardell said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who gave speeches at civic functions and posed for photographs with youth groups. "What seems to be the situation here?" Isaiah studied the sheriff's approach. Everything about Vardell was calculated. The timing of his arrival, the tone of his voice, the way he positioned himself between Isaiah and the crowd. This was not a man who had rushed to the scene in response to radio chatter. This was a man who had been waiting for a phone call. "Sheriff Vardell," Isaiah said. "I'm Attorney General Isaiah Bellamy." Vardell's expression shifted to one of surprised recognition, though Isaiah noted the surprise looked rehearsed. "Attorney General Bellamy, what an unexpected honor. I had no idea you were visiting our county." "I don't believe I announced my visit." "Of course not. Of course not." Vardell spread his hands in a gesture of understanding. "I can only imagine what kind of misunderstanding brought you into contact with my officers. Please accept my sincere apologies for any confusion." The word confusion hung in the air like smoke. Isaiah felt his cheek where Griggs had slapped him. He looked at the registration papers still scattered across the pavement. He thought about Rourke's hands on his truck, Griggs's fist in his shirt, the crowd of witnesses who had watched him get humiliated. "Confusion," Isaiah repeated. "Exactly. An unfortunate misunderstanding that I'm sure we can resolve quickly and quietly." Isaiah's voice remained perfectly level. "Sheriff, who entered the stolen vehicle alert for this truck?" The question cut through Vardell's smooth apologies like a blade. The sheriff's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Well, I'd have to check with dispatch, of course. These things happen so quickly in the field. I'd appreciate that check." Vardell reached for his radio, but Isaiah held up a hand. "I'll wait." The sheriff spoke quietly into his radio, requesting the information. The response crackled back through the speaker, audible to everyone standing nearby. "Unit 17 to Sheriff. The stolen vehicle alert for the red pickup was entered at 2:47 p.m. through the restricted LEO channel. Alert originated from your direct access terminal." The parking lot went completely silent. Isaiah looked at his watch. It was 2:51 p.m. 4 minutes, he said quietly. The alert was entered 4 minutes before Officer Griggs arrived. The Juniper County impound lot sat behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, surrounded by weeds and broken asphalt. Isaiah followed the tow truck in a state vehicle, watching his father's red pickup disappear behind the gate, like evidence being swallowed by a machine designed to make things vanish. Sheriff Vardell had insisted the truck needed to be towed for verification of ownership and inspection for evidence tampering. The excuse was tissue-thin, and everyone knew it. Isaiah's registration was legitimate. His identification was unquestionable. But Vardell had smiled his practiced smile and explained that proper procedure required a thorough examination, especially given the serious nature of the allegations. "We'll have your vehicle back to you within the hour, Attorney General," Vardell had promised, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Just want to make sure everything is properly documented for our reports." Isaiah had agreed because he wanted to see what they would do next. He wanted to watch who touched the truck, who had access to it, and what kind of evidence might mysteriously appear. Corrupt men always overplayed their hands when they thought they were winning. The tow yard gate clanged shut behind them. Isaiah parked his state vehicle where he could observe the entire lot through the fence. The facility was larger than he had expected, filled with dozens of vehicles in various states of abandonment. Rusted sedans with missing tires, SUVs with shattered windows, pickup trucks that looked like they had been seized yesterday and forgotten for months. Sergeant Clay Rourke took charge immediately, his clipboard in hand like a weapon of bureaucratic authority. He barked orders at the tow truck driver, directing him to park Isaiah's pickup in the center of the lot, where it would be visible from all angles, but difficult for anyone unauthorized to approach. "Nobody touches that vehicle without my direct supervision," Rourke announced to the small crowd of impound workers. "This is evidence in an active investigation." Isaiah noticed how the workers avoided eye contact with Rourke, how they moved with the careful efficiency of people who had learned not to ask questions. One woman in particular caught his attention, a thin, nervous-looking clerk in her 30s who kept glancing at the red pickup with something that looked like fear. The woman's name tag read Bethany Pike. She carried a camera and a clipboard, documenting the truck's arrival with mechanical precision, but her hands shook slightly as she worked. When Rourke ordered everyone except essential personnel to step back from the vehicle, Bethany looked relieved to retreat to the safety of the office trailer. Isaiah watched through the fence as Rourke and Officer Griggs approached his truck. They moved like men conducting a routine inspection, but their body language told a different story. Griggs kept looking toward the office trailer. Rourke positioned himself to block sight lines from the street. They were preparing to perform for an audience of one. The security camera mounted on the trailer's roof. The performance began with Rourke opening the driver's door and peering inside. He called Griggs over, pointing at something under the seat. Both officers stepped back, their faces arranged in expressions of surprise and concern. Griggs jogged toward the trailer, emerging moments later with Bethany Pike and her camera. The clerk moved reluctantly, her eyes darting between the officers and the truck, as if she were being led to her own execution. "We need this documented immediately," Griggs announced loudly enough for his voice to carry across the lot. "Found something suspicious under the driver's seat." Isaiah gripped the steering wheel of his state vehicle. He knew what was coming before it happened. Rourke reached under the seat and withdrew a manila envelope thick with papers and what appeared to be cash. He held it up for Bethany's camera, making sure the security system captured every angle. Griggs pulled on latex gloves and opened the envelope carefully, his movements theatrical and precise. "Counterfeit title documents," Griggs called out, his voice filled with manufactured shock, "and approximately $2,000 in cash." The two officers exchanged looks of grim satisfaction. Bethany Pike took photographs with mechanical compliance, but Isaiah could see her discomfort even from a distance. She knew she was documenting a lie, and the knowledge was eating her alive. Sheriff Vardell's patrol car pulled into the lot just as the discovery was being completed. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Vardell emerged from his vehicle with the slow confidence of a man who was about to deliver bad news with relish. "Attorney General Bellamy," Vardell called across the fence, his voice no longer carrying even the pretense of respect. "I'm afraid we have a problem." Isaiah stepped out of his vehicle and approached the fence. "What kind of problem, Sheriff?" "The kind that suggests you may have interfered with an active vehicle theft investigation." Vardell's smile was cold and calculating. "The kind that raises questions about whether the state attorney general has been abusing his position for personal gain." The planted evidence was crude, almost insulting in its obviousness. But Isaiah understood that the crudeness was intentional. They were not trying to fool him. They were creating a narrative for the media, for his political enemies, for anyone who wanted to believe that even the state attorney general could be corrupt. Isaiah pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had memorized years ago. "Dana, it's Isaiah," he said when Chief Investigator Dana Mercer answered. "I need you to preserve everything. Every camera angle, every tow record, every dispatch entry, every piece of paper that touches this case." "What's happening down there?" "They just planted evidence in my truck." Isaiah's voice was calm, but underneath the calm was steel. "I want every second of security footage from this impound lot. I want the chain of custody for that envelope. I want to know who had access to my vehicle and when." "Are you safe?" "For now. But Dana, this wasn't random. Someone knew I was coming. As night fell over the impound lot, Isaiah stood by the fence watching his father's truck sit under harsh fluorescent lights like a piece of evidence in its own frame-up. The red paint gleamed under the artificial glare, beautiful and defiant, despite everything they had tried to do to it. Sheriff Vardell and his officers had made their move. They had turned a simple traffic stop into an elaborate setup designed to destroy Isaiah's credibility before he could expose whatever they were hiding in Juniper County. But they had also made a crucial mistake. They had assumed Isaiah would react with anger, that he would fight back immediately and publicly, giving them the spectacle they needed to complete their narrative. Instead, Isaiah Bellamy did what he had always done when facing corrupt power. He watched, he learned, and he began to plan their destruction with the patience of a man who had spent his entire career turning other people's lies into their own chain. The stop had been staged from the beginning. Someone had wanted the state attorney general humiliated, discredited, and neutralized before he could threaten whatever criminal enterprise was operating under Juniper County's badge. Now Isaiah knew he was not just investigating police corruption, he was fighting for his own survival in a war that someone else had started. That evening, Isaiah and Dana Mercer set up a temporary command room inside a quiet hotel conference room near the Juniper County Courthouse. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they arranged folding tables and chairs in the sterile space that smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Isaiah had chosen the location carefully. The hotel was far enough from the sheriff's department to avoid unwanted surveillance, but close enough to the courthouse to maintain legitimacy. More importantly, it was neutral ground where witnesses might feel safer speaking the truth. Dana spread files across the table with methodical precision. She was a woman who believed in action, in swift justice, in making corrupt officials pay immediately for their crimes. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her expression showed barely contained fury at what had happened to her boss. "We should hold a press conference tonight," Dana said, not for the first time. "Get ahead of whatever narrative Vardell is spinning. Show the world what they did to you." Isaiah shook his head as he taped photographs to the wall. The images told a story: his red truck in the parking lot, Griggs approaching with aggressive body language, the scattered papers on the pavement, the moment of the slap captured by a bystander's phone camera. "That's exactly what Vardell wants," Isaiah replied. "He wants me angry. He wants me reactive. He wants the story to become about my response instead of their corruption." He stepped back from the wall and studied the timeline he was building. Each event was marked with precise timestamps, location data, and witness information. The restricted alert at 2:47 p.m., Griggs' arrival at 2:51 p.m., the backup arrival at 2:54 p.m., the planted evidence discovery at 6:23 p.m. "Look at this pattern," Isaiah continued, pointing to the timeline. "The parking lot stop, the restricted alert, the tow yard search, the planted envelope. Each step was planned. Each step had backup ready. This wasn't Griggs acting alone." Dana pulled out her laptop and began cross-referencing dispatch records. The stolen vehicle alert came through a terminal that requires supervisor approval. Griggs couldn't have entered it himself, which means someone with authority wanted me stopped before I could begin my investigation. The hotel room felt small and cramped, but it was secure. Isaiah had learned long ago that justice was built in quiet rooms like this one, with patient people gathering facts that could not be denied or twisted. Courtroom victories happened in places like this, not in front of television cameras. Dana's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, speaking in low tones before hanging up. "That was Lorraine Massey from the farm supply store," Dana reported. "She confirms the security footage was backed up automatically to their cloud server before local officers requested access. They can't alter what's already stored off-site." Isaiah felt the first piece of solid ground beneath his feet. Digital evidence with timestamps and chain of custody. Video that showed exactly what happened, exactly when it happened, and exactly who was responsible. A soft knock interrupted their planning. Dana checked the peephole before opening the door to reveal an elderly black woman with silver hair and steady eyes. She carried an old canvas folder that looked like it had survived decades of careful handling. "Marlene Whitaker," the woman introduced herself, stepping into the room with quiet dignity. "Retired court clerk. I heard you might need some help understanding what's been happening in this county." Isaiah gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. Tell us what you know." Marlene settled herself carefully and opened the canvas folder. Inside were photocopies of court records, auction notices, seizure reports, and property transfers. The documents were organized with the precision of someone who understood exactly how bureaucratic corruption operated. "Juniper County has been stealing vehicles from black residents for years," Marlene said matter-of-factly. "They use fake stops, inflated fees, and rushed auctions. They make the paperwork so confusing that people give up fighting. They schedule hearings during work hours when folks can't attend. They charge storage fees that double every week until the vehicle is worth less than the debt." She spread the documents across the table like evidence in a trial. Each page told the same story: traffic stops that escalated into seizures, families who lost transportation, elderly residents who couldn't navigate the legal maze designed to defeat them. "How many vehicles?" Dana asked. "In the past 5 years? At least 40 that I could document. Probably twice that many where the records were sealed or destroyed." Isaiah studied the patterns emerging from Marlene's files. The seizures clustered around election years. The auction buyers were often connected to county employees or their families. The legal challenges were routinely dismissed on technical grounds that prevented appeals. "This is systematic theft," Isaiah said quietly. "They're not just taking individual vehicles, they're destroying people's ability to work, to take their children to school, to get medical care." Marlene reached into her folder again and pulled out a photograph. It showed a white passenger van with New Hope Baptist Church painted on the side in blue letters. She placed the photo on the table with careful deliberation. "They took this from us, too." The next morning, light filtered through the hotel conference room's thin curtains, casting long shadows across the scattered documents that had become Isaiah's temporary war room. Coffee cups and legal pads covered every surface. 2 state investigators, Marcus Webb and Jennifer Torres, had driven down from the Capitol overnight, bringing additional resources and fresh eyes to examine Marlene's carefully preserved records. Isaiah sat at the head of the small table, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed file after file. Each document told the same story with minor variations, like a script that had been performed dozens of times with different actors, but the same tragic ending. "Walk us through the pattern again, Mrs. Whitaker," Isaiah said, his voice calm but focused. "I want to make sure we understand every step." Marlene opened her canvas folder and pulled out a thick stack of photocopied traffic citations. Her fingers moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades organizing court records, finding connections that others missed or chose to ignore. "It starts with the stop," she began, laying out the first document. "They target older vehicles driven by black residents. Not junkers that might actually be suspicious, but decent vehicles that people worked hard to afford. Griggs or one of his officers claims the driver is nervous. The registration looks questionable, or the VIN might be altered." Dana leaned forward, taking notes on her laptop. "What happens next?" "The vehicle gets impounded, pending investigation," Marlene continued, placing another document on the table. "The owner gets a receipt and a phone number to call, but when they call, they get transferred between departments. Nobody can give them straight answers. The paperwork keeps changing." Isaiah studied a seizure notice dated 6 months earlier. The language was deliberately confusing, full of legal terminology that would intimidate someone without formal education. The fees were listed in small print at the bottom, with daily storage charges that compounded quickly. "They make it impossible to navigate on purpose," Isaiah observed. "How much time do people have to reclaim their vehicles?" 30 days, Marlene replied bitterly. "But they don't tell you about the storage fees until week 3. By then, you owe more than the vehicle is worth. They schedule the hearing during business hours when working people can't attend. If you miss the hearing, they declare the vehicle abandoned and send it to auction." Jennifer Torres, One of the state investigators whistled softly. That's not law enforcement. That's organized theft with badges. A knock at the door interrupted their review. Dana checked the peephole and admitted a tall, thin black man in his 60s wearing a faded work shirt and clean jeans. His shoulders were slightly stooped, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who had spent decades doing manual labor. "This is Earl Freeman," Marlene said, gesturing to the man. "Earl, this is Attorney General Bellamy." Earl approached hesitantly, his eyes moving from Isaiah to the scattered documents. He carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who had learned not to trust authority figures too quickly, but who still maintained his self-respect, despite what the system had done to him. "Mr. Freeman," Isaiah said, standing and extending his hand, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat. Tell us what happened to you." Earl shook Isaiah's hand firmly, but remained standing for a moment, studying the room. Finally, he pulled out a chair and sat down, his posture straight, despite the weight of exhaustion that seemed to surround him. "It was my work van," Earl began, his voice steady but carrying years of suppressed anger. "White Ford Transit. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Had all my tools, my contracts, my business cards, everything I needed to keep working." Isaiah leaned back in his chair, giving Earl his full attention. He had learned long ago that victims needed to tell their stories completely, without interruption or judgment. The details mattered. The emotional impact mattered. The human cost of corruption was always found in stories like Earl's. "I was driving home from a job in the next county over," Earl continued. "Brake light repair at Mrs. Patterson's house. Simple work, but she pays fair. Officer Griggs pulled me over right at the county line, said my van looked suspicious for the area." Dana's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Suspicious how?" "He said a van like mine had been reported stolen earlier that week, but when I showed him my registration, he claimed the VIN looked altered, said the numbers were scratched or tampered with somehow." Earl's hands clenched into fists on the table. "That VIN was clean as the day I bought that van. Never been touched by anything but factory stamps." Isaiah made notes with careful precision, documenting every detail. "What happened next?" "Van got towed to the county impound. Griggs said it would just take a day or two to verify the VIN with the manufacturer. That was 6 months ago." Earl's voice cracked slightly. "Lost 3 major contracts because I couldn't haul my equipment. Lost my insurance because I couldn't make payment. Lost my apartment because I couldn't make rent without work." The room fell silent except for the scratch of Isaiah's pen and the quiet hum of Dana's laptop. Marcus Webb, the other state investigator, pulled out his phone and began cross-referencing Earl's story with the seizure records Marlene had provided. "The storage fees kept climbing," Earl continued, "started at $50 a day. Then they added investigation fees and processing charges. By the 3rd week, I owed more than I paid for the van originally. They said I could get it back if I paid the full amount, but where was I supposed to get $2,000 without my tools or my business?" Isaiah set down his pen and looked directly at Earl. "Mr. Freeman, I need you to think carefully about this next question. During your interactions with the county, did you hear the same names mentioned repeatedly?" Earl nodded immediately. "Griggs did the stop. Sergeant Rourke handled the impound paperwork. Sheriff Vardal's signature was on the final seizure notice, and the auction was handled by 3 companies that kept bidding on everything." Dana looked up from her laptop. "Do you remember the company names? Valley Auto Salvage, Premium Vehicle Recovery, and Juniper Holdings," Earl recited without hesitation. "Same 3 buyers at every auction. They'd bid low, split up the vehicles among themselves, then resell them for full market price." Isaiah felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came when a case began to crystallize. Individual acts of corruption were bad enough, but systemic theft required coordination, planning, and protection from higher authorities. "Mrs. Whitaker," Isaiah said, turning back to Marlene, "do you have records showing who owns those auction companies?" Marlene smiled grimly and pulled another stack of documents from her folder. "Secretary of State business filings, tax records, and campaign finance reports. It took me months to trace the connections, but the paper trail is all here." Dana moved to the wall where they had posted their timeline and began adding new names, dates, and connections. The pattern was becoming clear. Traffic stops led to seizures. Seizures led to auctions. Auctions led to the same buyers. And those buyers were connected to the very officials who authorized the seizures in the first place. Marcus Webb finished his phone call and looked up from his notepad. "I just spoke with our financial crimes unit. They can have forensic accountants here by tomorrow to start tracing money flows." "Good," Isaiah replied. "Mrs. Whitaker, I need you to show Dana exactly how these seizure dates line up with the auction transfers." Dana pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop and began entering data as Marlene guided her through the records. Vehicle seized on Monday, auction notice filed on Tuesday, hearing scheduled for the following month, auction held 2 days after the hearing whether the owner appeared or not. The pattern was so consistent it looked like a business model, rather than law enforcement procedure. "Isaiah," Dana said quietly, her eyes fixed on her screen, "you need to see this." She turned the laptop toward him, displaying a comparison chart she had created. The seized vehicles were repeatedly sold to companies connected to Sheriff Vardal's campaign donors. That afternoon, Isaiah and Dana moved from the hotel to the county records annex, a squat brick building behind the courthouse that smelled of old paper and industrial disinfectant. Marlene walked ahead of them down a narrow hallway lined with metal filing cabinets, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. "Most people don't know this place exists," Marlene said, pulling a ring of keys from her pocket. "The county moved all the computerized records to the main building years ago, but the old paper files are still here. They figured nobody would bother looking through boxes of handwritten ledgers." She unlocked a heavy door marked Archive Storage and flicked on fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered before settling into harsh white illumination. The room was filled with metal shelving units stretching from floor to ceiling, each one packed with cardboard boxes, bound ledgers, and manila folders thick with dust. Dana coughed as particles swirled in the air. "How far back do these records go?" 1967, Marlene replied, walking toward the back corner of the room. "I've been coming here for months, pulling files whenever I had a few hours free. The county clerk's office is too busy to pay attention to one old woman looking through forgotten paperwork." Isaiah followed her past rows of boxes labeled with years and case numbers until she stopped at a section marked Vehicle Seizures and Impounds. The shelves here were less organized, with ledgers and loose papers mixed together in no apparent order. "The oldest seizure records are in these ledgers," Marlene said, pulling out a thick book bound in cracked leather. "I started here because I wanted to see how long this has been going on." She opened the ledger to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. Isaiah moved closer to read the faded handwriting, and his breath caught in his chest. There, in neat cursive under a date from 32 years earlier, was his father's name, Abraham Bellamy, red Ford pickup, suspicious ownership inquiry, County Road 47, Deputy H. Vardal investigating. Isaiah stared at the entry, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the ledger. The same truck they had accused him of stealing yesterday had once been targeted when his father was alive. Deputy H. Vardal had to be Hollis Vardell, decades before he became sheriff. "They've been doing this for over 30 years, Dana whispered, reading over his shoulder. Isaiah's jaw tightened as the implications settled in his mind. The corruption wasn't recent. It wasn't opportunistic. It was generational, passed down from one administration to the next, like a family business. Marlene pulled another file from the shelf, this one much thinner and more recent. "There's something else, Isaiah. Something I didn't know how to tell you at the hotel." She opened the file and pointed to a request form dated 7 years earlier. The paper was cleaner than the old ledgers, printed on official letterhead rather than handwritten. Isaiah read the document header, Records Access Request, Confidential Investigation. Then he saw the signature at the bottom, and his world shifted beneath his feet. The request was signed by Naomi Bellamy, his late wife. "Your wife requested copies of these same seizure records," Marlene said quietly. "She came here about 8 months before she died, asked specifically for vehicle seizure patterns, auction records, and any complaints filed against the sheriff's department. Isaiah gripped the filing cabinet to steady himself. Naomi had never mentioned investigating Juniper County. She had been working on civil rights cases, focusing on voting access and housing discrimination. But here was proof she had been digging into the same corruption that brought him here. Did she say why she needed the records? Dana asked. Marlene shook her head. She just said she was following up on a client complaint, asked me to keep the request confidential because the investigation was sensitive. Isaiah forced himself to breathe slowly, fighting the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Naomi had died in a car accident on a rainy night, her vehicle sliding off a winding county road into a deep ravine. The state police had ruled it weather-related, no signs of foul play, just another tragic reminder to drive carefully in bad conditions. But now, holding this file, Isaiah wondered what Naomi had discovered about Juniper County. Had she found evidence of the seizure racket? Had she identified the network of officials and auction companies? Had someone learned about her investigation? Dana moved beside him and opened the file wider, scanning the approval signatures on Naomi's access request. Her finger stopped at the bottom of the form, where a familiar signature appeared in blue ink. "Isaiah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at who approved her access to the files." Isaiah looked down at the signature approving access to the files. Victor Harrow, his trusted senior counsel. The same Victor Harrow who knew Isaiah's travel schedule. The same Victor Harrow who had access to confidential investigation plans. The same Victor Harrow who could have arranged for a stolen vehicle alert to be entered into the restricted police channel. Isaiah realized someone inside his own office may have known about Juniper County for years. The Juniper County Civic Auditorium buzzed with tension as residents filed into folding chairs under harsh fluorescent lights. Sheriff Hollis Vardell stood against the side wall in his pressed uniform, arms crossed and chin raised like a man certain of victory. Officer Nolan Griggs positioned himself nearby, also in uniform despite being on administrative leave, wearing the smug expression of someone who believed public humiliation worked both ways. Sergeant Clay Rourke leaned against the wall behind them, scanning the crowd with calculating eyes. All three men watched Isaiah Bellamy enter through the back door, followed by Dana Mercer and Marlene Whitaker carrying her worn canvas folder. The room fell silent as Isaiah walked down the center aisle. Whispers followed him, pointing fingers. A few residents nodded respectfully, but most stared with the wary curiosity of people watching a man they had been told was dangerous. Mayor Patricia Henley called the meeting to order from the podium, her voice tight with nervous authority. "We're here tonight to address recent events that have brought unwanted attention to our county." Vardell stepped forward with theatrical concern. "Citizens of Juniper County deserve to know the truth about what happened in that parking lot. My officers followed proper procedure during a routine vehicle check. Unfortunately, Attorney General Bellamy chose to escalate the situation instead of cooperating." A planted voice from the third row shouted, "He's trying to destroy our police department." Another voice from the back added, "We don't need outsiders telling us how to run our county." Griggs straightened against the wall, his chest puffing with vindicated confidence. He nodded along as if the crowd was finally seeing sense. Isaiah remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply watched and listened, letting Vardell's orchestrated performance unfold. "This man abused his power," declared a woman Isaiah recognized from earlier research as the wife of one of Vardell's auction buyers. "He's using his office to get revenge for being treated like everyone else." Griggs actually smiled now, believing the momentum had shifted permanently in his favor. Isaiah rose slowly and walked to the podium. The room tensed, expecting anger or defensiveness. Instead, Isaiah spoke in the same calm voice he had used in the parking lot. "I'm not here to defend myself," he said simply. "I'm here to listen to you." He gestured toward Marlene, who stood and walked to the front of the room carrying her folder. "Ma'am, would you please tell these folks what you told me?" Marlene opened her folder and spread the first document on a small table beside the podium. Her voice carried the steady authority of someone who had spent decades keeping accurate records. 34 vehicles seized from black residents in the past 3 years, she began, reading from her notes. 17 work trucks, 8 family cars, 5 church vans, 4 motorcycles belonging to veterans. The planted voices tried to interrupt, but Marlene continued without pause. Every seizure followed the same pattern: minor traffic stop, suspicion of stolen property, impossible paperwork requirements, storage fees that doubled every week, rushed auctions with 3 days' notice. She held up a receipt. Earl Freeman's work van, seized during a routine stop for supposedly altered VIN numbers, sold at auction for $800 to Meridian Auto Sales. Earl Freeman stood in the middle section, his weathered hands shaking slightly. That van was worth $12,000. I used it to fix people's roofs, their plumbing, their electrical work. Lost everything when they took it. His voice grew stronger. Took me 30 years to build my business. Officer Griggs destroyed it in one afternoon. Griggs's smile faded. He shifted uncomfortably against the wall. Another resident stood, then another. Martha Washington rose and said they took her son's motorcycle after claiming it matched a theft report from 2 counties over. James Mitchell stood and described losing his pickup after Rourke said the registration looked suspicious. The atmosphere in the room shifted like weather changing. Fear transformed into outrage. Planted voices fell silent as real voices grew louder. "How many families did they rob?" someone called out. "Where's our money from those auctions?" demanded another. Vardell tried to interrupt. "Now hold on. These are serious accusations." "Sit down, Hollis," shouted a woman from the front row. "We want to hear what they took from us." Marlene spread more documents across the table. Auction records, title transfers, bank deposits, showing the money flowing to the same 3 companies. Shell corporations connected to Vardell's campaign contributors. Isaiah watched the crowd's anger build, but he did not fan the flames. He simply let the truth speak for itself. "I'm requesting an emergency preservation order from the state court," Isaiah announced calmly. "All seizure records, all auction documents, all body cam footage, all dispatch logs will be protected, pending a full investigation." Vardell stepped forward, his face red with controlled fury. "You can't just—" "I can," Isaiah said simply, "and I will." He turned and looked directly at Officer Nolan Griggs, who stood frozen against the wall as his confidence cracked like ice under pressure. "This investigation is no longer about one truck." Late that same night, Isaiah and Dana packed their files in the hotel command room with the focused urgency of lawyers preparing for war. The town hall had shifted everything. Real victims had spoken. Real evidence had surfaced. Vardell's planted voices had been overwhelmed by genuine outrage. "We need the preservation order filed before sunrise," Isaiah said, sliding documents into manila folders. "If they destroy those records tonight, they won't risk it," Dana interrupted, sealing evidence bags with tape. "Too many witnesses saw Marlene's files. Too many people are watching now." Isaiah moved methodically, organizing dispatch logs, auction receipts, and witness statements into separate stacks. His movements were calm, but his eyes held the sharp focus of a man who understood time was running out. Dana's phone rang at 11:47 p.m. She answered on the second ring, then froze. "Fire department dispatch. The county evidence room is burning." They were in Isaiah's rental car within minutes, racing through empty streets toward the sheriff's office. Orange light flickered against the courthouse windows 3 blocks away. Smoke rose in thick columns against the dark sky. Isaiah pulled into the parking lot as volunteer firefighters aimed hoses at the rear wing of the building. Sheriff Vardell stood near the main entrance in hastily dressed civilian clothes, talking rapidly with the fire chief. His expression showed the right mixture of shock and concern. Dana grabbed Isaiah's arm as they climbed out of the car. "Look at Rourke." Sergeant Clay Rourke stood 20 yards from the evidence room entrance, arms crossed, watching the flames with the calm detachment of a man observing someone else's problem. His uniform was too clean for someone called out of bed for an emergency. Isaiah walked directly toward Vardell, ignoring the heat and smoke. What happened? Electrical accident, Vardell said immediately, his voice carrying practiced authority. Old wiring in the evidence storage area. We're lucky it didn't spread to the main building. Where's the body cam server? Vardell's pause lasted half a second too long. Storage room, same area that caught fire. And the impound records? Evidence filing cabinets, probably damaged by smoke and water. Isaiah studied Vardell's face in the flickering light. What about the envelope from my truck? Gone, Vardell said with false regret, along with most of the seized vehicle documentation from the past 6 months. Dana moved closer to Rourke, pretending to watch the firefighters while listening to his radio conversations. He was too calm, too prepared, like a man who had expected this call. Isaiah's phone buzzed at 12:23 a.m. Dana saw his expression change as he answered. Mr. Bellamy, this is County General Hospital. We have Marlene Whitaker in the emergency room. She was in a car accident about an hour ago. She's asking for you. The drive to the hospital took 12 minutes. Isaiah found Marlene conscious but battered, her left arm in a sling and her forehead marked with stitches. She gripped his hand when he approached the bed. Wasn't no accident, she whispered, her voice hoarse but determined. Big truck forced me off Mill Pond Road, right after I called your voicemail. What did you find? The hidden owner, the name behind all the shell companies. Her eyes were sharp despite the pain medication. It goes higher than Vardell. Someone in your office has been protecting this whole operation. Isaiah felt cold certainty settle in his chest. Who? Before Marlene could answer, Isaiah's phone rang again. Victor Harrow's name appeared on the screen. Isaiah answered carefully. Isaiah, thank God you're okay. Victor's familiar voice carried concern that sounded genuine. I just heard about the fire and Marlene's accident. You need to step back from this case immediately. Why? An ethics complaint was filed against you 3 hours ago. Abuse of office, personal vendetta, improper use of state resources. The review board wants your emergency powers suspended, pending investigation. Isaiah stared through the hospital window, at the orange glow still visible above the courthouse. Smoke drifted across the parking lot like fog. Who filed the complaint, Victor? I can't say yet, but Isaiah, this looks bad, really bad. You need to let someone else handle Juniper County before they destroy your career. Isaiah ended the call and stood in the quiet hospital room. Marlene watched him with worried eyes. Dana moved beside him, understanding, without words. The enemy had reached inside his own office. The hotel command room smelled like stale coffee and marker ink when Isaiah returned at dawn. Dana had already spread fresh files across the conference table, her laptop open to arrest records and incorporation documents. Dark circles under her eyes showed she had not slept. Marlene's car was totaled, Dana said, handing Isaiah a paper cup of black coffee. But the state police recovered her folder from the passenger seat. Isaiah set down the coffee without drinking and examined the damaged manila folder. Water had soaked through most pages, turning careful handwriting into gray smudges. Auction notices had dissolved into pulp. Court records were unreadable. Years of Marlene's patient documentation destroyed in one night. But at the bottom of the folder, sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve, one document remained untouched. Isaiah pulled it free and spread it on the table. The page showed a flow chart drawn in Marlene's precise handwriting, connecting shell company names to auction brokers to bank account numbers. Red arrows pointed from seized vehicles to final buyers. At the top of the page, circled twice in black ink, was a name that made Isaiah's chest tighten. Victor Harrow. Dana leaned over his shoulder. The profits from the seizure auctions went through 3 shell companies before landing in accounts tied to Victor's consulting firm. Marlene tracked the paper trail back 4 years. Isaiah studied the flow chart without speaking. His trusted senior counsel, the man who had attended Naomi's funeral, who knew Isaiah's travel schedule, who had access to sealed investigative files. The betrayer had been sitting across from him in staff meetings for years. We arrest him today, Dana said, her voice hard with anger. Right now, before he destroys whatever's left. No, Isaiah moved to the evidence board and began organizing the surviving documents with methodical care. He separated confirmed facts from reasonable suspicions. He drew new timeline connections. His hands remained steady, but Dana saw the muscle working in his jaw. Isaiah, he set you up. He leaked your route to Vardell, triggered the false stolen truck alert, probably arranged for Marlene's accident too. I know. Then why aren't we moving on him? Isaiah taped Marlene's flowchart to the center of the board, then stepped back to study the full pattern. Shell companies, auction records, bank transfers, and at the heart of it all, Victor's careful signature on documents that should never have crossed his desk. Because Victor is not just stealing money, Isaiah said quietly. He's been protecting this operation from inside the Attorney General's office. If we arrest him now, he'll claim he was conducting his own investigation. He'll destroy files we haven't found yet. He'll turn this into a jurisdictional fight that takes months to resolve while Vardell and his people scatter. Dana poured herself more coffee, frustrated but listening. What's your plan? Isaiah pulled out his phone and dialed Victor's direct number. When Victor answered, Isaiah forced exhaustion into his voice. Victor, it's Isaiah. I need your advice. Of course. How are you holding up after last night? Not well. The ethics complaint, the fire, Marlene's accident. Maybe you're right. Maybe I pushed too hard, too fast. Victor's relief was audible through the phone. You did the right thing calling me. This case was always going to be difficult given your personal involvement. I'm thinking about returning to the capital. Let someone else handle the seizure investigation. That's probably wise. Take some time. Let the review board see you're not pursuing a vendetta. Isaiah met Dana's eyes across the table. She understood the performance, but clearly hated it. There's just one thing I want to wrap up first. Isaiah continued. Juniper County is holding an emergency auction tomorrow for disputed vehicles, including mine. I'd like to attend, maybe get some closure before I step back. Of course, that sounds reasonable. After hanging up, Isaiah turned to Dana. Now we let every corrupt player gather where they feel safest. The county auction. That afternoon, Isaiah divided his remaining team across 3 locations. He sent 2 state investigators to secure the farm supply store footage. Dana would handle the tow yard and pressure Bethany Pike for the truth. Isaiah himself would meet Marlene at her church, where she claimed to have hidden backup files years earlier. The farm supply store sat under the same harsh afternoon sun that had witnessed Griggs's assault 2 days before. Lorraine Massey met the investigators at the back entrance, her face tight with nervous energy. I've been thinking about this since the town hall, she said, leading them through storage rooms toward her office. That officer never looked at any papers before he grabbed Mr. Bellamy. He just saw a black man in a nice truck and decided it had to be stolen. The security system occupied a corner of her cramped office. Lorraine's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, navigating through cloud storage files the sheriff's department had never requested access to. Here, she said, pointing at the screen. This is the parking lot angle from Tuesday afternoon. The footage played in crystal-clear detail. Isaiah stepped from his red truck at 2:47 p.m., moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. Griggs appeared at 2:48 p.m., rushing from his cruiser without checking any computer systems or running license plates. The assault began at 2:50 p.m., with Griggs slapping papers from Isaiah's hands before reading them. The slap across Isaiah's face occurred at 2:52 p.m., 30 seconds before Griggs demanded to see registration documents he had already scattered. He never checked nothing, Lorraine said, her voice hardening. Just saw an old black man and figured he could do whatever he wanted. One investigator copied the files while the other took Lorraine's sworn statement. The timestamp evidence would destroy any claim that Griggs had followed proper procedures. Meanwhile, at the county tow yard, Dana found Bethany Pike chain-smoking behind the impound office. Bethany's hands shook as she lit another cigarette. I can't keep doing this, Bethany said before Dana even introduced herself. I got kids. I need this job, but I can't keep watching them destroy people's lives. Dana sat on a concrete barrier beside her. Tell me about Isaiah's truck. Bethany took a long drag and stared at the rows of impounded vehicles. Sergeant Rourke ordered me to process the intake alone Tuesday evening. Said nobody else should handle the paperwork. That never happens. We always have 2 people for chain of custody. What did he tell you to do? Leave the truck unlocked in Bay 7 for 20 minutes while I filed the tow report. He said someone would inspect it for evidence. When I came back, Griggs was standing beside the open door with that envelope in his hand. Dana kept her voice gentle. Had you seen that envelope before? Never. And I searched that truck completely during intake. There wasn't nothing under no seats except an old blanket and some tools. Bethany showed Dana the intake photos she had secretly taken on her personal phone. The images clearly documented the truck's interior before the mysterious envelope appeared. Why did you take pictures? Because Rourke been making me falsify reports for months, saying vehicles had damage they didn't have, claiming we found drugs or weapons that nobody found. I started keeping records because I knew somebody was going to blame me when it all came out. At Marlene's church, Isaiah followed the elderly woman down narrow basement steps into a storage room that smelled of dust and old hymnals. Boxes lined concrete walls beneath low ceiling pipes. I've been copying county records for 15 years, Marlene explained, moving choir robes aside to reveal file boxes underneath. Every auction notice, every seizure report, every suspicious title transfer. Nobody pays attention to old church ladies asking for public documents. Isaiah opened the first box and found meticulous records organized by year and case number. Marlene had documented the entire evolution of Juniper County's vehicle seizure operation. Here's what you need, she said, handing him a thick folder. Every vehicle seized from black families since 2018, cross-referenced with auction buyers and final ownership transfers. The pattern was undeniable. Seized vehicles consistently sold to the same 3 shell companies for prices far below market value. Those companies immediately transferred ownership to local dealers connected to Vardell's political donors. They've been stealing from us for years, Marlene said quietly, taking cars from people who couldn't afford lawyers, then selling them cheap to their friends. Later that evening, Isaiah's red truck was finally returned under court order. Sheriff Vardell personally delivered the keys with a tight smile, claiming all verification procedures had been completed. Isaiah inspected the vehicle carefully in the hotel parking lot. The exterior showed no damage, but he noticed scratches around the door handles where multiple people had accessed the interior. They went through every inch of this truck, Dana observed. Isaiah nodded, then knelt beside the driver's seat. His fingers found the concealed latch his father had built into the floor decades earlier, hidden beneath the carpet edge. The small compartment opened to reveal a waterproof case. Inside was a thumb drive labeled NB Insurance in his late wife's careful handwriting. Dana connected the drive to her laptop while Isaiah sat in the passenger seat. The files opened to reveal hundreds of scanned documents, seizure records, bank statements, shell company filings, and handwritten notes in Naomi's precise script. The notes told a devastating story. Naomi had discovered the first version of Vardell's vehicle racket years earlier, connecting illegal seizures to money laundering through Victor Harrow's consulting firm. She had been building a case when her car skidded off a rural road during a winter storm. Isaiah stared at his wife's final notes, dated just 3 days before her death. She had written, "Victor approved sealed warrant requests he should never have seen. He's protecting them from inside our office." Isaiah touched the laptop screen gently, tracing the words his wife had written to expose the truth. "I promise you," he whispered, "this case will finally be finished." The next morning, Isaiah sat in the hotel lobby with his shoulders slightly slumped, projecting the image of a defeated man. He had chosen a public table near the window where passing county employees could see him checking out, his luggage stacked beside his chair. Word spread quickly through Juniper County's government offices. The state attorney general was leaving town. Sheriff Vardell wasted no time capitalizing on Isaiah's apparent retreat. By noon, he had called an emergency press conference announcing an accelerated auction of disputed vehicles, including several still under legal challenge. "We cannot allow bureaucratic delays to burden county taxpayers," Vardell declared to local reporters. "These vehicles have been properly processed through established procedures, and they will be sold this Saturday as scheduled." Officer Griggs appeared on WJNP radio that afternoon, his voice cocky and vindictive. "The Attorney General thought he could come into our county and throw his weight around," Griggs said. "But the truth came out. He overplayed his hand, and now he's running back to the Capitol with his tail between his legs. I expect we'll get an official apology soon enough." Victor Harrow called Isaiah twice that day, each conversation more insistent than the last. "Isaiah, you need to distance yourself from this situation," Victor said during the second call. "Let the Civil Rights Division handle it from here. Your personal involvement has compromised the integrity of any potential case." Isaiah let exhaustion creep into his voice. "Maybe you're right, Victor. The ethics complaint, the planted evidence, the fire, it's all too convenient. Someone's been feeding them information." "What do you mean?" Victor's tone sharpened slightly. "Nothing concrete," Isaiah replied carefully. "Just a feeling that they've been one step ahead from the beginning, like they knew I was coming before I even arrived." Victor's pause lasted a beat too long. "You're probably just tired. Get some rest, and we'll reassign this when you're back in the Capitol." While Isaiah played his part as the defeated Attorney General, Dana worked with methodical precision in the background. The backup footage from the farm supply store provided clear evidence of assault and false arrest. Bethany Pike's sworn statement detailed how Rourke ordered her to leave Isaiah's truck unattended. Marlene's duplicate records connected years of illegal seizures to the same auction buyers. Most damaging were Naomi's old files from the hidden compartment, which traced financial transfers from shell companies back to Victor Harrow's consulting accounts. Dana obtained sealed warrants for conspiracy, civil rights violations, money laundering, and racketeering. She coordinated with state police commanders who moved their units into position overnight, staging in neighboring counties to avoid detection by Vardell's network. The pieces were falling into place with surgical precision. That evening, Isaiah walked alone to his red truck in the hotel parking lot. He ran his hand along the restored fender his father had once dented, hauling lumber for their church. Tomorrow would bring justice or failure, vindication or disgrace. He thought of Naomi's careful handwriting on those hidden files, documenting corruption she never lived to expose. He thought of Earl Freeman losing his livelihood to Griggs' lies. He thought of Marlene nearly dying because she refused to let powerful men steal from her community. Isaiah stood beside the red truck at dawn, knowing the next day would decide everything. The Juniper County impound auction lot stretched under gray morning light, with seized vehicles arranged in neat rows like prisoners awaiting judgment. Sheriff Hollis Vardell stood on the wooden auction platform in his pressed uniform, surveying the crowd with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had won. Griggs leaned against a patrol car near the side gate, still wearing his badge despite being on administrative leave. Rourke stood beside the registration table with a clipboard, checking names as buyers arrived. The usual suspects filled the front rows: 3 auction brokers who always bid on the best vehicles, 2 county commissioners, and several donors who had supported Vardell's campaigns for years. Victor Harrow stood near the back, dressed in an expensive suit and checking his phone repeatedly. He had driven down from the Capitol that morning, telling colleagues he wanted to observe how Isaiah's reckless investigation was being resolved. Families clustered along the fence, watching helplessly as their vehicles sat tagged for sale. Earl Freeman stared at his work van through the chain link. An elderly woman pressed her face against the metal, looking at the pickup she had used to drive her husband to dialysis before Griggs seized it for suspicious ownership. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vardell called through a microphone, "welcome to today's county surplus auction. All vehicles have been lawfully seized and processed according to state guidelines." The first few lots sold quickly. A sedan went for $300 to one of the brokers. A motorcycle disappeared for $50. The crowd remained silent, understanding that resistance was pointless. "Next item," Vardell announced. "Lot 17, One restored red pickup truck, previously claimed by an individual under investigation for vehicle theft and interference with police procedures. Isaiah's truck sat in the morning light, polished and clean, despite everything it had endured. Just as Vardell raised his gavel, Isaiah Bellamy stepped through the crowd. Dana Mercer walked beside him, followed by 6 state investigators in dark suits. Behind them came forensic accountants carrying sealed boxes. Uniformed state police officers moved through the side gates, blocking every exit. "This auction is suspended by emergency court order," Isaiah announced, his voice carrying across the lot without strain. Vardell's gavel froze in midair. "Now hold on! Sheriff Vardell, you are under arrest for conspiracy, civil rights violations, and racketeering," Dana said, producing handcuffs and a warrant. "Please step down from the platform." The crowd erupted. Griggs pushed away from the patrol car and tried to reach the side gate, but 2 state troopers blocked his path. "You can't do this!" he shouted. "This is harassment! Officer Griggs, you are under arrest for assault, falsifying police reports, and deprivation of rights under color of law," one trooper said, forcing Griggs's hands behind his back. Rourke dropped his clipboard and reached for his phone, but Dana was already beside him. "Sergeant Rourke, that device is evidence under court warrant." She seized the phone before he could delete anything. Isaiah walked slowly toward the platform where Vardell still stood in shock. "For 3 years, you have used false stolen vehicle alerts to justify illegal stops. You have planted evidence in seized vehicles to prevent court challenges. You have burned public records to hide your crimes. And you have profited from the sale of stolen property through shell companies operated by conspirators inside my own office." Victor Harrow tried to slip toward the parking area, but state investigators surrounded him. "Mr. Harrow, you are under arrest for conspiracy and money laundering." "This is insane," Victor protested. "I'm senior counsel in the Attorney General's office." "You were," Isaiah said quietly, "until you decided to betray it." The handcuffs clicked around Vardell's wrists on the auction platform, while the crowd watched his power collapse in public. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Juniper County Courthouse steps as state officials processed evidence boxes and arrest records. Cars lined the street. Families stood in small groups, some crying, others staring in disbelief at the collapse of a system that had seemed untouchable just hours before. Isaiah watched from the courthouse entrance as Officer Nolan Griggs was led past in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. The man who had slapped him in a parking lot now faced federal charges for assault under color of law, falsifying police reports, evidence planting, and civil rights violations. Griggs kept his eyes down, no longer the swaggering bully who had enjoyed humiliating older black men in public. Sergeant Clay Rourke followed in similar restraints, charged with conspiracy, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. His careful paperwork and quiet threats had finally caught up with him. The phone Dana seized contained deleted messages coordinating planted evidence and witness intimidation. Sheriff Hollis Vardell emerged under heavy guard, facing racketeering charges, public corruption, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. His polished uniform had been replaced with standard jail clothing. The man who had run Juniper County like his personal kingdom now walked past the citizens he had robbed. Victor Harrow was taken away separately, led through a side entrance to avoid the press cameras. His expensive suit and confident smile were gone. The paper trail he thought he had buried had exposed shell companies, laundered auction profits, and years of leaked information. His betrayal of Isaiah's office would ensure federal prosecution and disbarment. Isaiah did not celebrate loudly. He focused on restitution. Earl Freeman stood beside his work van in the courthouse parking lot, running his hands over the familiar dents and scratches. State officials had returned the keys along with a check covering lost income and illegal storage fees. "I can work again," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Marlene Whitaker, bruised but alive after her car was forced off the road, watched as the church van was released from the impound lot. The vehicle that had carried elderly members to Sunday service for years was finally coming home. "They said we'd never see it again," she whispered. Family after family received their vehicles back. A grandmother got the pickup she needed for her husband's medical appointments. A young father retrieved the sedan required for his job. Each key returned represented dignity restored and lives rebuilt. The recovered money from Shell Company accounts would fund a new statewide public corruption task force. Isaiah had insisted it carry his late wife's name, the Naomi Bellamy Justice Initiative. As evening approached, Isaiah walked toward his restored red truck in the courthouse lot. The same vehicle that had triggered this entire confrontation now sat clean and returned, its ownership finally undisputed. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Through the courthouse windows, Griggs watched from a holding cell as Isaiah drove slowly past. The old black man he had tried to humiliate was leaving as the state attorney general who had destroyed an entire corrupt network. Isaiah did not look back at him. He simply drove away. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.